around for centuries now, but many people still know who developed the first vaccine and what the first vaccines were to be developed. In 18th century Europe, when milkmaids were working with cows who developed the cowpox disease, an epidemic later broke out in Europe of smallpox. Edward Jenner, an English physician, discovered that these milkmaids who were exposed to the cowpox disease were later not infected by the smallpox disease. From Pasteur and Modern Science by René Dubos. This discovery was the beginning of a long development of immunity and vaccines. Louis Pasteur was one of the most influential figures of vaccine development at the time. He developed many vaccines such as anthrax, rabies, and chicken cholera. There's a lot of skepticism surrounding his vaccines after he had first administered it to the public. Still today, there's a lot of skepticism surrounding vaccines, what they are, how they work, and how effective they are. Louis Pasteur's early background started out as a chemist. He then became a researcher and a professor. The juice industry asked him to figure out why juice was spoiling. So Pasteur looked at the juice under a microscope and found yeast and other microbes that were causing it to spoil. They were using their metabolic processes to convert sugar into alcohol, and he later called this process fermentation. From Louis Pasteur's Encyclopedia World Biography, it discusses Pasteur's new method of pasteurization, which helped keep beer, wine, and milk from spoiling. This process involved heating the liquid briefly to very hot temperatures in order to kill bacteria that were causing it to spoil. From an article by Chris Woodford called Louis Pasteur, Inventors and Inventions, Louis Pasteur's pasteurization method developed from the germ theory and his interest in studying microbiology. At the time, people believed in spontaneous generation. This was the idea that germs could arise from anything. Pasteur did not believe in this. He believed germs were organisms and could be transmitted through the air, and he proved this through a series of experiments. Pasteur's first vaccine to be developed was chicken cholera in 1880. Pasteur accidentally left a week-old batch of chicken cholera and infected it with the chickens, and the chickens became sick but did not die. He then realized that the weaker bacteria made the chickens immune to the stronger form. From Louis Pasteur's On the Germ Theory, it discusses how he first demonstrated that microbes were living organisms by culturing and diluting the blood from a chicken infected with the disease. Even with the dilution, the culture became very cloudy, and you could tell that the bacteria was multiplying a bunch. Pasteur's observations led to the idea of a vaccine. He discovered that if an organism was infected by a weakened form of the virus, then the animal would not suffer as much when infected with a stronger form of the disease. In 1885, Louis Pasteur then developed his rabies vaccine. He tried using his normal culturing techniques by isolating the disease-causing agent and growing it in a lab, but this method was not successful. He figured out that this disease could only be transmitted through living organisms. And this is what we now call viruses, and we need a host to survive. From How Pasteur Changed History by Moira Reynolds, it discusses how Pasteur tested this on dogs by using a weakened rabies virus from the dried spinal cord of rabbits. He discovered that after a dog bite, the saliva entered the tissues of an animal, and the disease-causing agent multiplied and then attacked the central nervous system. At the same time, a 9-year-old boy named Joseph Meister was bitten by a rabid dog. Pasteur decided to try his new vaccine on him. It was a success, but it caused a lot of skepticism and controversy among the public. Pasteur was a very influential figure at the time, and he developed in November 14, 1888, the Pasteur Institute in France. Today, the Institute promotes a lot of scientific research and it helps public health initiatives and helps with disease prevention. From the Story of Pasteur Institute article, it discusses that when Pasteur first opened his institute, he used it to administer his rabies vaccine. He hired a lot of scientists to study the different diseases and then share their knowledge around the world. There was a lot of skepticism during Pasteur's time about vaccines and immunity, and there's still a lot of skepticism today and anxieties about vaccines and how well they work. At the time, people believed that vaccines were harmful and they shouldn't be used because after getting his rabies vaccines, many people either got unknown reactions or they received it too late and the vaccine wasn't effective. From How Pasteur Changed History by Moira Reynolds, it also talks about how Pasteur was criticized for not having a thorough understanding and knowledge of how his vaccines worked and how the immunization process worked. From an article called Straight Talk About Vaccination by Matthew Daly and Jason Gland, it discusses how parents today are still skeptical about vaccines. They believe their children are either not at risk for them, for certain diseases such as measles, polio, and tetanus that aren't as prevalent in the U.S. today, or they believe that there's a lot of side effects and it's not worth it. It also discusses how diseases such as chickenpox they believe aren't serious enough to be vaccinated. Louis Pasteur started out as a chemist, and his interest in microbiology led him to the discovery of his first vaccine on chicken cholera. He left a very long, lasting influence in medicine today, and his Pasteur Institute in France still operates and is very effective in medicine. There's still a lot of skepticism surrounding vaccines, and there's a lot of skepticism at Pasteur's time about how well the vaccines worked. Now that we've had a brief overview of vaccines and their origins, it's important to do your own research still to make informed decisions for yourself and to keep up to date with new scientific